Episode 116 of the Interpretation Station is called to order. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a brand new episode of the Interpretation Station. We've got a bit of a medley for you today. Oh yes, so all of you guys with Spanish, French, Russian, there's something for you all. I was going to do Arabic, but I've chickened out of it. The Arabic one I had from this meeting was too hard. But nevertheless, I think we've got plenty to be going with. So what we've got for you today is a meeting that I was in a couple of weeks ago. On the 8th of February, and it was in, I believe it was in the Human Rights Council, and it was a seminar. It was a seminar titled, with a grand title of The Negative Impacts of the Non-Repatriation of Funds of Illicit Origin to the Countries of Origin on the Enjoyment of Human Rights. Now, what I've got for you, I've taken from that seminar statements by... I'll tell you, by Cuba, by Peru for Spanish, by Russia, for Russian obviously, by Tunisia in French, plus I've also taken a text that was just delivered in English, actually by Angola. Funnily enough. Now, why have I got a statement for you from Angola in English? Well, the reason why is that, at least for me, with my level of experience, when I come into the room, let's say, and there's a subject that perhaps I'm not all that familiar with, one thing I'll do is and if there are statements lying around the table in the booth, one thing I'll do is I'll look for one of the English language statements and I'll just plagiarize it. Yeah, I'll just look at the English language text. Often, you know who are good ones for that, like the EU texts, for example, have often very good vocabulary, real sort of subject-specific vocabulary. They're very well set out. But so in this case, Angola, as I thought, has some good baseline material, and it's going to act as our sort of control. Okay, we're going to just draw. We're going to see how much of the stuff that Angola says is then repeated by other delegations. So as I say, this for me is a no-brainer when I come in. Now, I just assume everyone does it, but perhaps when you're starting out in your career, it's not something you might think of immediately to do. But it's always good to just take a good English text that's in English and just harvest a lot of the vocabulary from that. So we're going to start with the Angolan one, and then we're going to move on to the Russian, the French, and then we'll finish it with the two Spanish ones. But I encourage you, as I say, even if you don't have the Russian, there's some interesting vocabulary in the Russian, vocabulary that we can harvest. So just stick with it. And as usual, the link to the texts, well, I will provide that in the description box down below, and I will also try and find the links to the audio so that you can go and practice all those statements that are relevant to your combination. Again, I always suggest you should try to record yourself first before you watch the episode. Do a recording and then see how your performance tallies with the tips and tricks that I give you from the relevant statements. And so, yeah, without further ado, let's go and have a look. Let's have a look at the statements that we had here. So we're going to start off with the control with Angola. Okay, so I've shared the screen with you now, so you should be able to see the statement by Angola. So the first, imagine you come into the booth and there you go. You're doing the subject. First thing is, you got this statement, for example, nicely has the name of the actual seminar, and that's obviously going to be something they're going to refer to a lot, and it's useful to have a note of that. You see lots of interesting expressions that you might not always, non-patriation of funds of illicit origin to the countries of origin. That's an important phrase. That's you can be almost certain that many of the delegations are going to be repeating that, right? So it's always good to highlight that, whatever, to note it down. There you go. So there we go. I'm highlighting that, right? Okay, so what have I underlined here? You can see some of my annotations here. So this, convening this important timely meeting, classic opening statement from any delegation. Convening, summoning. These are good pair of synonyms to know for that. So Angola aligns with the African group statement. So I often say that Angola aligns with. I don't even say whatever. Angola aligns itself with. Don't bother with the itself. I just say so-and-so aligns with, our delegation aligns with the statement by the African group. Okay, then I've got a couple here. It's another good word here, aggravated. Okay, the challenges have been aggravated, or what other synonyms do we have there? Compounded by, exacerbated. That's a good little triumvirate of synonyms to know. By the impact, aggravated by the impact. There's the collocation, you see, with aggravated. Again, you can say to have compounded the impact, exacerbated the impact. Okay, Angola welcomes the participation as well as the engagement of Madam High Commissioner. I like engagement. Okay, engagement is a good synonym for involvement. I tend to find I say involvement a lot, for example, but I think engagement is a nice sort of diplomatic term used at diplomatic level. Okay, so it's important, to have to engage with other countries, to engage with other organisations. So the engagement of the Commissioner throughout the implementation of Resolution 4611. Now that's important. Okay, there's a good chance that that resolution is going to probably get mentioned. Okay, so you always want to make a note of that resolution there. I would be writing that down on my little sheet of note paper. 40 spin big numbers, 4611. Because you can be fairly certain that resolution is going to get referenced quite a bit during these kinds of statements. Okay, then this is a sort of a favourite collocation of mine. Okay, is to bridge and address the current obstacles. Now, when I'm interpreting, I love bridging gaps. If you watch enough interpretation station episodes, you'll know that that I like bridging gaps a lot. Now, you can obviously also bridge obstacles. So again, that's those two good expressions to know: bridging obstacles, bridging gaps. Now, again, this is gonna. I mean, I know, as I say, I did this meeting. I was assigned to it. So asset recovery. An expression like that, you can be certain is going to be used a lot. So it's good to be prepared. You might even not, off the top of your head, not be able to think of what the relevant expression is in whatever Spanish, Russian, French. But you're going to be able to recognize it when it comes, and then when you do hear it, you'll know, oh, okay, it's asset recovery. So that would be a crucial sort of expression to have noted down. This is just very basic. Eradicate poverty. I always just try and remind you that is the best collocation with poverty. They are always about poverty eradication, much more so than elimination. Okay, these little details, they're all little details, but they all add up over the course of a statement, over the course of a meeting. They all add up to showing, to really sort of showing how competent you are as an interpreter in getting out these sort of buzz phrases. So you took at eradicating poverty. Now this is handily here. The Angolans have actually put this bit in bold. So if they put it in bold, then there's a good chance that they consider a really important expression. An unconditional return of assets to their countries of origin. Okay, so take their advice. They've got it in bold. So I would make it a little, there's a good chance, again, other delegations are going to be using it. Unconditional return of assets to their countries of origin. And again, another favourite sort of expression, or another very common idea, is alleviating the burden. Okay, in this case, it's alleviating the financial burden. But that is a notion that you're going to hear a lot in all kinds of contexts, in geopolitics or whatever, and in international diplomacy, trying to lift the burden, alleviate the burden. That's a very good collocation to be familiar with. And then I just, in this final paragraph, I thought this was an interesting expression, as they put it, in the service of the realization of economic, social, and cultural rights. So I'm all right with realizing rights. I tend to maybe say my two favorite go-to verbs for rights, I guess, are enjoyment, for the exercise. But I think you can also realize rights as well. In the service of, I know that expression from French. They often talk about, don't they, au service de faire quelque chose. Usually when I hear that au service, at least in French, I tend to go for the benefit of the realization of rights. But so maybe I would slightly query. I would perhaps slightly query their use there of the service. I don't know if I would perhaps prefer to hear in the benefit of the realization of economic, social, and cultural rights. So anyway, that's just to quickly show you the interesting bits from the Angolan statement, some of the expressions and phrases that we're going to maybe plunder as we go along. And you know, as an interpreter, have no qualms about plundering and plagiarizing. It's when interpreting and in translating, I think it's to be recommended that don't be shy about stealing the good vocabulary that you find in other statements. Okay, so that's our control. So let's now move on to the Russian statement first of all. Okay, so you non-Russian speakers, you may want to fast forward onto the French, or you could just stick with me and watch and see what other expressions the Russians give you that might be again repeated later on. Okay, so first of all, it's good to cross-reference, you know, what the Russians use for the buzz expressions in this seminar. Невозвращение фондов. Okay, so look at that. That's going to be the non-repatriation. So it's not the non-return. That's what, or at least they use the same word for non-repatriation. Незаконного происхождения, of illegal origin, to countries of origin, страны происхождения. Okay, so I'll just go through this. I'll give you just a sort of sight translation, and I'll stop at the bits that I've underlined as we go along. So Russia supports, I think you can probably drop the delegation. Russia supports the holding of this intersessional seminar on the issue of the repatriation. So we know now that возвращение in this context at least is repatriation of funds of illicit origin. So sometimes незаконного незаконный can be illegal, unlawful. Now in this context here, фондов незаконного происхождения, we know we're going to be using mainly illicit. And views this as an important step towards restoring justice. Restoring fairness, restoring justice, I think is better here. Now, the particular relevance of this issue can be seen now in the heat of the pandemic, where states bereft of licit budget funds find themselves in a very vulnerable position, which will inevitably have an impact on the exercise of human rights. So a couple of things here. I remember actually when I did this, when I was interpreting, when I heard the особую актуальность, I started off with what's particularly relevant here. But then I jumped in too soon, because what you really wanted to say here was that, the special relevance of this problem, приобретать именно сейчас, can be seen right now. That's how it would have been better. But I'd already leapt in with what's particularly relevant. Now, how am I going to get round that, without correcting myself? What's particularly relevant with this problem now is that in the heat of the pandemic, where states. So I just, tweak that opening phrase a bit so that it still comes out fairly naturally without doing this, for example. What's particularly relevant, this problem, the particular relevance of this problem can be seen right now. Okay, so I just, I don't immediately correct what I've said. I just try, as the sentence goes on, just to tweak a couple of things. So what's particularly relevant with this problem right now is that in the heat of the pandemic, where states denied licit budget funds. I said licit here for законные, maybe you can just say legal budget funds. Okay, find themselves in a very vulnerable position. Okay, this is a favorite thing that the Russians use. Не может не сказываться. Okay, so when I hear that не может не, I don't go with the double negative. I'll often say will inevitably. So forth. I think that works maybe 90% of the time when you have these не может не will inevitably impact обеспечение прав человека. Let's say for just enjoyment or exercise of human rights. Or we had from Angola, we could plagiarize, we can pinch the expression the Angolans used, the realization of human rights. Okay, so moving on. Moreover, it's important to note that repatriation, преступных активов, illicit assets, criminal assets, I think you could go with either there. Criminal, illicit seems to be the word of the day, doesn't it? So I've heard this a lot. I hear them use this a lot, the Russians. Преступные активы. Those assets are sort of gained from criminal activities or illicit activities. I think here, illicit assets at international level is chiefly governed by framework standards. Okay, so I think governed here is the best, when these processes, and you have the processes and you have the legislation applicable to them, I think they're governed by framework standards. Normami framework standards or framework norms. As a result, the decision to repatriate stolen funds, похищенных средств, maybe you could say seized funds, confiscated funds, stolen funds. Any one of these words, I think, would be appropriate in the context. As before, significantly depends on усмотрение государств, которые они выводятся. Okay, at усмотрение, that's an important word. Okay, discretion. It depends on the discretion. Okay, you've got the должное усмотрение is due discretion. That's an important phrase to do with all sorts of things, particularly when it comes to financial issues, governance, and so on, of states that they, of the discretion of the states where they are taken away to, or the states that they are, they're diverted to. Okay, according to information from Управление ООН по наркотикам и преступности. That's an important organization to be familiar with, all right? So that's the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, otherwise known as UNODC. I've actually done a statement. I've actually done an episode some time ago. I can't remember what it was. I'll put the link to it. I'll put the card up so that you can go to it. And it was a statement delivered by Russia, delivered at UNODC on combating corruption. So that's got a lot of good vocab in it. So I suggest I recommend you go and visit that. Try that statement over there. It's from UNODC. They're based out in Vienna. Okay, the majority of countries have no significant experience in providing. Okay, this expression of взаимной правовой помощи, this is mentioned in that episode. It's called mutual legal aid or mutual legal assistance, MLA. They even use the acronym there, mutual legal assistance in this sphere. That's a very that could help you out if you were in a pickle. MLA. And the doля, the share of repatriated assets. So remember, возвращение, this is all about repatriation. So go with the repatriated assets of the presumed total of illicit income remains insignificant or remains tiny. Maybe you say tiny. Незначительно. It remains tiny. And this reminds me of I'll give you a little anecdote. The word tiny reminds me of. So not long ago, I was in a meeting of the Conference on Disarmament, and the subject matter was lethal autonomous weapons. And the Russian Russian delegation is very active there. And he's a very good speaker. You can go and practice him, go to this conference on disarmament and practice the Russian delegate there. And he was speaking, and then he would sort of refer to, when talking about lethal autonomous weapons, the acronym for which, by the way, is LAWS, Lethal Autonomous Weapons Systems. I think it was the first meeting, actually, that I'd been in, so I was still getting used to the vocab. And he says whatever it was. He said something like, в резолюции говорится, что lethal, and then pause, autonomous weapon systems. So if I'd been in the meeting more, I'd have known that, okay, he was just going to say the full lethal autonomous weapon systems. But because he stopped after he said lethal, okay, in his Russian accent, pause, I was like, where's he going with this? Where's he going? So it's the resolution stipulates that little, and then he says autonomous weapon systems. Autonomous weapon systems. Little autonomous weapon systems, it came out as from my end. At this point, I realized, oh shit, that doesn't sound right. No, lethal autonomous weapon systems. And my booth mate started cracking up. Just the image of these little autonomous weapon systems. These instruments of mass destruction made to sound so cute and harmless. Little autonomous weapon systems. Not like the big ones, not like the big nasty big ones. Anyway, moving on. In that regard, Russia firmly supports, steadfastly supports, so that's one that the Russians love, последовательно выступает, steadfastly supports developing under the aegis of the UN or under the auspices of the UN a multilateral international legal instrument on выявлению. Okay, I've underlined that. So identifying, I suppose, is my go-to. Sometimes I talk about pinpointing. I think here maybe identifying is best. Identifying, freezing, confiscating, and repatriating illicit assets. So I think I was going with illicit most of the time. This instrument would help, устранить неопределенности. Okay, remember the Angolans, okay, they talked about bridging obstacles. So I think here, устранить неопределенности, this is again bridging gaps, really, isn't it? Bridging existing legal gaps. Maybe you can say loopholes. That's a good thing when it comes to legal instruments. You often talk about, addressing loopholes, bridging loopholes, and differences, as well as adding and konkretizировать. I think I said here, giving effect to give effect to something is a very good solution. It's better than to give concrete substance to norms. To concretize. Ugh. So that's a word I use a lot, to give effect to. I've said this before. So in the Charter, they're often giving effect to things. They're giving effect to provisions. They're giving effect to recommendations. It just means another way of saying implementing them, putting them into practice. But it sounds very high register. Sounds quite impressive. It give effect to norms contained in the UNCAC. Okay, that's what it's called, I believe. The Convention Against Corruption. UNCAC. I think that's what it is. And in the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. All right. Overall, we have no objections to preparing в пределах мандата, just within the mandate, I think you could say, just within the mandate of the SPC. Okay, you know that acronym? You've got to know that one. Совет по правам человека, the Human Rights Council. You could just say it within the mandate of the HRC. Не имеющих обязательно юридической силы. Okay, now you're probably more familiar, again, if you watch lots of interpretation station episodes, they often talk about legally binding instruments. LBIs, that's another acronym you'll hear. Legally binding instrument. Now, this is a не имеющих обязательно юридической силы. So this might be non-legally binding, What's now the thing? It's not an instrument here. It would be the rukovodящих принципов, the guiding principle. So I would say probably overall we have no objections to drawing up or preparing within the mandate of the Council or of the HRC non-legally binding guiding principles on repatriation of funds полученных нелегальным путем, so gained or acquired illegally for полученных, not received. I think you want the idea of gaining or acquiring. This kind of work, however, should be carried out on the condition of close cooperation with interested states and also с привлечением. Now, what do we have in Angola? Remember, they talked about the engagement of Madam High Commissioner. So, with the engagement, or you could say with the involvement, of the профильных структур. Okay, that's the UN specialized agencies. Remember that. Whenever it's about the UN, профильные структуры, the specialized agencies. First and foremost, UNODC, okay, Управление ООН по наркотикам и преступности, so as to avoid duplication of efforts in different fora. Again, this is a favorite Russian concept. They always talk about the need to avoid duplication of efforts. You could probably even do without the efforts, maybe, to avoid duplication in various fora. Okay, so that's your Russian for you. Now, let's now move on to the French. And so for the French, I took the statement by Tunisia. It's a bit clearer from the French, you know, what it's going to be in the English. Non-rapatriement, non-repatriation fund, illicit funds. That's pretty straightforward. So let's see what I've got underlined here. Thank you, President. My thanks also go to the High Commissioner for her déclaration préliminaire, her introductory statement, her opening statement. You know, just whatever that you want to have that notion at the ready. They always talk about that, you know, as well as to all the panelists pour leurs édifiantes contributions. I would probably here have said, I can't remember if I did this or not, for their valuable contributions. That's a very good, very easy way of just expressing that idea. So when they talk about rapport édifiant, which they often do, for reports, I'll talk about, you know, thought-provoking reports, very illuminating reports. I think with a contribution, we talk about a valuable contribution. Okay, President, today's seminar, revêt une importance et un intérêt particulier. Now, why have I put this in square brackets? I mean, this is all just really means is particularly important. Okay, I don't think you need to say is of particular importance and of special interest to my country. I mean, I think you could just say today's seminar is particularly important for my country. This is really just redundant. I think it's just, I don't think you need to repeat that idea. For my country, which was one of the chief initiators of Resolution 4611. So there you go. So if you'd looked at your Angolan text before the meeting started, you'd have been already well aware that the Resolution 4611 was the go-to resolution in this subject. Présenté depuis plus de 10 ans, that was presented, submitted, tabled. I've started saying tabled a lot recently. Tabled 10 years ago by the African Group on the theme of the impact of non-repatriation of illicit funds on the enjoyment of human rights. La priorité qui lui est accordée. And again, this expression here, qui lui est accordée, seems, again, just a bit excessive. You know, the priority given to it, the priority it has. I don't think you need to go to lengths of saying the priority bestowed upon it, or the priority attached. Let me see the priority attached to it. Émane de notre profonde conviction. It's always good to have a few words here for émaner. So, okay, you can just say emanates. That's, I guess, the sort of most straightforward English cognate. Derives from. Stems from, these are good alternatives, stems from our profound shared conviction For commune, I tend to go with shared as opposed to common. Common sounds a bit, you commoners. Of the indivisibility, the interdependence, universality of human rights, and the responsibility qui nous incombe à tous. So this is quite a high register statement, okay? The responsibility, you could just say that we all share the responsibility that falls on us all. But I think here you could just keep it sort of straight, just say the responsibility that we all share. Okay, resserrer les rangs, to close ranks is perhaps. I mean, if that idea doesn't come to mind immediately, you need something. You need to say something like with our shared responsibility to pull together, for example, to rally together. But so literally to close ranks, pour défendre et protéger les droits, to defend, protect rights. In particular, when humanity faces, as is the case today, one of the most severe pandemics with devastating impacts in a context of vulnerability and rareté des ressources. Okay, you've got the cognate rarity, but I think we're sooner going to talk in English about scarcity of resources in a context of vulnerability and scarcity of resources. Under such conditions, it's human rights that we are all committed to, that we all hold dear, which are threatened or jeopardized, and sadly, for a long time. As was well explained by our panelist and distinguished colleague, the Ambassador of Kenya, in his statement on behalf of the African group, the flow of funds of illicit origin prive plusieurs pays. Again, you have the cognate deprives, or I think denies several countries, in particularly dans notre continent africain. I think you just say it, particularly in Africa, particularly in our continent, the resources needed to, réalisation des droits de l'homme, so we can go with what the Angolan said, to realize human rights, to exercise human rights, including economic, social, and cultural rights. Again, always remember those three sets, those three in a package: economic, social, and cultural. And that all stems back, or goes back to the two big covenants. Okay, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and the other one, the International Covenant, Le Pacte in French, on civil and political rights. So remember those two sets. Okay, economic, social, and cultural on the one hand, civil and political on the other. In particular, the right to development. They are, as a result, a major obstacle, major impediment for something different to obstacle, to national efforts at economic relance économique. That's a very important expression to know these days. Economic recovery. Economic recovery, realization, or the attainment of the SDGs, which already face a funding deficit, funding shortfall, a funding gap, due to the health crisis, the sanitary crisis. Given this unprecedented situation, il est de notre responsabilité à tous. Maybe you could say, it's the responsibility of us all, but again, it's always nice to have an alternative as well. The onus, I like talking about the onus. The onus is on us all to redouble our efforts. I'm fine, I always say redouble. When I hear redoubler, I just tend to say redouble. Our efforts with a view to a swift, speedy repatriation of illicit assets from countries of origin, to countries of origin, because faut-il le rappeler? That's something they often use. I find the Africans use this a lot, this expression, and I always just say, lest we forget. Okay, just remember like that. Whenever you hear faut-il le rappeler, lest we forget, sounds very nice, very crisp in English. Because this is an inviolable and, un droit imprescriptible. So, prescription, is a statute of limitations. It's often used in the context of statements to do with the law. Okay, crimes committed, statute of limitations. Murder doesn't have a statute of limitations. It doesn't matter how many decades after the murder was committed, that person the perpetrator can still be charged and found guilty of it. Okay, now some crimes do have a statute of limitations when they basically go out of date. I mean, that's a sort of fancy legal way of saying that something's out of date. Now here, what would I say here? What would I say here? Because it doesn't really go well into English talking about, maybe you could say a non-time-bound right, an inviolable and non-time-bound right. I think when I said it, I said an inalienable right, which isn't. I know it doesn't mean exactly the same thing as the original French. Oh, you know what I said? A non-negotiable right. I think it's one of those cases that, well, unless you've got something really good, if you can think of something really good in like one word to reflect the idea, please do put it in the comments below. But I think you're within your rights here to go for a word that sounds natural when said in English, even though it isn't perhaps 100% spot on. But it needs to be close. So the idea, I said the non-negotiable right, maybe an inalienable right, a non-derogable right. I just think it's too much hard work to say. This is a right that has no statute of limitations. It just takes too long to say. Maybe if you've had the chance to prepare it and the speaker's not going too fast, you could get it out. But I think it's reasonable under those sort of circumstances just to go with a word that sounds close, even though it's not 100%. Since these assets, spoliés et détournés. So, okay, I think I said looted. For spolié, looted, stolen, and you got my 3 P's: pilfered, plundered, pillaged. That was the other one. I've got my 3 P's: pilfer, plunder, pillaged, and loot. I think I said looted and diverted. So this is, they talk about diversion of assets. So when I hear détourné, you talk about weapons being diverted from legal illicit channels into illicit channels. So that's the idea. It means that they were previously legal, but then they've been diverted into the illicit channels. So I think I said like looted and diverted by right belong to the people who've been victims of corruption and and its multiple facets and fraudulent and illegal means. Maybe facet, multiple dimensions. Okay, the solidarity and cooperation by all parties prenantes, stakeholders, that's a very important expression, to achieve tangible, swift results. Seront un message, will be a message and a sincere commitment, a sincere and responsible commitment to people whose goods and wealth have been plundered, stolen. Okay, there we have the spolié a second time. Whatever you said there, it's always, mix up your, try and expand your, as I say, your synonyms that have been, whose wealth has been plundered. This will contribute tangible proof to peoples, and above all to youth, that crimes linked to corruption. Now, I must admit, actually, when I was doing this text during the meeting, I ran into passe droit. I did not know what passe droit were, so I've had to look that up. Privileges, so that crimes linked to corruption and to privileges, favors, maybe. Will not escape impunity. And here he goes again, he talks about l'imprescriptibilité, ne tombera pas dans l'imprescriptibilité. So here maybe you may want to say, will have no statute of limitations, will never expire. Those crimes will never expire. That might be a good way of doing it. What do you think? Crimes linked to corruption and to favours will not escape impunity and have no expiration date. What do you think about that? And that a tomorrow that is respectful of laws and of human rights and of human dignity is entirely possible. Okay, that's the Tunisian one. Okay, now let's move on to let's find the Spanish ones now. So we'll start off with Peru, which handily gives you, okay, so some of the title in English, options for a non-binding set of practical guidelines for efficient asset recovery. Okay, thank you, moderator. Peru is convinced that corruption is a scourge, un flagello. I always go with scourge, more or less. Is a blight. Sometimes we talk about blight. It's a bit old-fashioned, but usually go with scourge. Whose impact carcomen los esfuerzos. Now, again, I took a guess. I didn't recognize this word. I'd never come across it before, to be honest. But this is one of those situations where you can really tell from the context, carcomen los esfuerzos de nuestro país. I mean, you know, it's going to be they're going to undermine the efforts. They're going to undercut the efforts of our countries to promote sustainable development and the enjoyment of human rights. Corruption in projects designed to improve the well-being of the population impede, okay, hampers, whatever, hinders, hamper, hinder, impede, access for persons to basic services, affecting their economic and social rights, especially for those persons in situations of vulnerability. Maybe you could, you know, if you're in a real hurry, personas en situaciones de vulnerabilidad, especially for the most vulnerable. That would basically sum all that up. Aquellas personas en situaciones de vulnerabilidad. If you're going really fast, I think if you just said affecting their economic and social rights, especially those of the most vulnerable, and I think that says, you know, that basically says that of those persons in situations of vulnerability. Corruption within key institutions for the functioning of the law and of justice. Again, socava. Okay, so we've got a synonym here of carcomen. Again, undermine, maybe we could say jeopardizes the enjoyment of civil and political rights. Este repudiable fenomeno, this despicable phenomenon, this repugnant phenomenon, this deplorable phenomenon, erodes trust of the population in their institutions. So look at that, you've got carcomen, socava, erosiona. A lot of synonyms there. You've got 3 Spanish synonyms straight away for that same idea. We're grateful to Dr. Carrion Ordinola, the ad hoc prosecutor in the Lavajato case, for her presentation on best practices which have been developed in Peru and the, recuperación de activos ilícitos. So again, I take you back, you know, to the original, you know, the Angolan statement at the start. So the asset recovery, okay, illicit asset recovery. That's the sort of the buzz phrase for this meeting. En un caso de envergadura en gran importancia para diversos países. So one thing that occurred to me here, one thing that we say a lot in English for un caso de envergadura, like for a really big case, okay, maybe in a landmark case. Now, if you were just doing this on the fly without text, you know, you heard de envergadura y gran importancia, you'd probably say the recovery of illicit assets in such a high-profile case, such an important case for various countries. But I just want you to think of that, take note of that suggestion there when they're talking about a big legal case, where we talk about landmark case. So that Lavajato case, actually, that they mention, it was actually a case in Brazil, money laundering, and it's to do with money laundering within the Brazilian state-owned oil company Petrobras. 280 convictions, returned about $800 million to Brazilian state coffers. So this is obviously a big case, I guess, in this region, as the delegate says. So it's maybe worth, again, just taking note of that name. It might come up in other contexts. The efforts described se enmarcan en el inquebrantable compromiso. So I think here reflect the unbreakable, unflinching, unstinting commitment, the steadfast commitment. Okay, any one of those I think would, unwavering, did I say unwavering? Commitment. Again, you've got to say, this expression, se enmarcan en, it can often, I think to reflect is just the safest way to go. I know there was a text I did the other day, I think it was maybe by Venezuela, when the best word was like was to abide by. The context, in the context, it was to abide by was the best. But here I think just play safe and just say, are reflected in the unflinching commitment of the Peruvian state to firmly luchar contra la corrupción, to combat corruption in all its manifestations and at all levels. Destaco, I would highlight at international level the leadership of Peru in the adoption of the political declaration against corruption at the UN Special Session Against Corruption 2021. At national level last December, Peru approved Integrity Strategy 2022, establishing a package of 10 priority measures in 4 areas of action, 4 fields of action. These are aligned, or these alineadas a los alcances. Now, if you're going to render every word, I guess you could say these are aligned with the scope. Okay. But I think here you could just say alineadas a los alcances de la política nacional. I think these are consistent with these priorities are consistent with the national policy on integrity and fighting corruption, which has been updated with a view to 2030, running up to 2030. Madam Moderator, my country believes that recovery of funds of illicit origin and developing measures and actions to prevent corruption should go hand in hand with, or should be accompanied by, ir de la mano para, creating comprehensive strategies, holistic strategies, they do like getting holistic at the UN, to combat corruption and reverse its effects. For revertir sus efectos, reverse, undo its impact, mitigate its impact, particularly with respect to enjoyment of all human rights. Okay, so that was Peru. And to finish, we'll have a bit of Venezuela, a bit of tub thumping from the Venezuelans. You can't go wrong with a Venezuelan statement for learning a few new words. Or rather, not Venezuela, Cuba. Okay, so President, we're grateful to you for convening this seminar. Okay, remember the Angolans were convening the seminar, for summoning this seminar, and for the opening statements. And we're grateful to the panelists. Cuba reiterates the need to repatriate immediately and unconditionally illicit funds to countries of origin, según lo dispuesto en la convención. So this is again something I say a lot when you have this según lo dispuesto in. If you just say in English, as per the UNCAC, the convention, the UN Convention Against Corruption, you can say, okay, consistent with the convention, in accordance with, in keeping with, as per the UNCAC and other international commitments. We reiterate the need to make combating corruption a priority at all levels, and to impede, to hinder, to prevent the illicit transfer of funds. We support the call of affected countries, sumamos al reclamo, to intensify efforts para localizar, congelar y recuperar, so to locate, to freeze, and to recover those funds. Okay, so these are all ideas that have been mentioned several times in these texts. It is preocupante, okay, troubling, disturbing, distressing that only a fraction of los fondos robados, spoliés, as we had in French. Again, looted funds, stolen funds have been returned to their countries of origin, afectando los esfuerzos nacionales, affecting national efforts to promote human rights. Se requiere mayor compromiso. What's needed is greater commitment, political will and cooperation, particularly in the rich countries. President, okay, favorite topic of the Cubans. Medidas coercitivas unilaterales, unilateral coercive measures, UCMs as they're often known as, are a major obstacle in this effort. In that regard, the economic, commercial, financial blockade, it's always, the Cubans always talk about, it gives these three adjectives, económico, comercial y financiero, economic, commercial, financial blockade. Perhaps if you were going fast, you could drop one or even maybe two, Everyone knows about the blockade against Cuba, you could probably just say the economic blockade. You could probably just say the blockade, but it's good to have an adjective. Imposed against Cuba by the US, has just marked its 60th anniversary of being officially promulgado. So when I hear promulgado, I just tend to say of its enactment. You could, I guess, say its adoption. Despite this policy and of its exacerbated resurgence, recrudecimiento, that's a word you'll hear a lot in Spanish. And again, I like to go to resurgence. During the COVID pandemic and its devastating impact on the country, on the economy of the country, Cuba is trying to work para recuperarse de la pandemia. Okay, you can say to recover from the pandemic, but in the spirit of building back better, I thought maybe, yes, Cuba is trying to build back from the pandemic. That's perhaps a good synonym for to recover. Maintaining at all times, preventing and combating corruption as a priority of the state and of Cuban civil society. So there you have it. There's your 4 texts I think we've got through there on this issue of repatriation of illicit funds. And so there's your tip. There's a good tip with you. It's always good to plagiarize in interpreting, and it's good when also good when delegates plagiarize you. I think that it's only interpreters who can appreciate that smug feeling, right? When you're doing a statement, you're interpreting from the language, and you come up with something like, let's say you say, we need custom-made solutions to tackle these problems. Okay, maybe the original was something boring, but you've come out with custom-made solutions or made-to-measure solutions. And then you listen, and then other delegates speaking later will then say, as the delegation of Spain said, what we need are custom-made solutions. And they plagiarize, they take the word that you used, and you're just sitting there going, yes. Only interpreters can be familiar with that feeling. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed that. Hope you've learned some new words in your respective languages. Give me a like, share, subscribe. Please leave me comments. Leave me comments, okay? That really helps. You don't have to pay for any of this, okay? Just leave me comments. Tell me what words. Tell me what was the most interesting thing you learned in today's episode. Put it in the comments. It's good for my the algorithms like it. It's good for my algorithms. Yeah. So do that, pretty please. That's pretty much it for today. It's been a pleasure as always. All that remains to be said is that episode 116 of the Interpretation Station stands adjourned.